Another session, probably one of the most important sessions to date of Cannon's class. It is my pleasure and my distinct honor to be sitting across from someone who's dedicated his life to not only loving, healing, and teaching, but also, in the times that we are currently in, bringing people closer together from all walks of life. But he has some accolades that we'd be here all day if we started to list them all. But currently the director of Global Action at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Rabbi Abraham Cooper. How you doing, sir?
Doing fine.
Even in COVID, we shaking. We got hand sanitizer. Well, we checked our temperatures and everything. We
can't really tame former New Yorkers.
I would say from the streets of Brooklyn, right?
That's right.
Oh man, like I said, there's so many places where we can begin, but I'm gonna be honest. The first place I was introduced to your name was when I was scrolling through Twitter about myself, which I've kind of been, on that forum a lot lately, and I saw something saying anyone seeking a PhD in Jew hatred should watch this interview, and that was you referring to the interview that I had with Professor Griff, and I feel like that may have been even one of the first things that I saw on Twitter that started this snowball effect and eventually became an avalanche of accusations of anti-Semitism towards me, which I had, I've been called many things. I've been canceled several times for being outspoken, sometimes even for my educational platform. But that one was a new one for me specifically, because I in no means ever had, I don't have a hatred towards any group of people, but specifically Jewish people, because I feel there is such a connection and kindred spirit to the Jewish community from, and I'm not, this is definitely not the moment for me to be like, hey, my great-grandfather is Jewish, or, my best friend. I'm not in that moment, but really as someone who's studying theology and, on a mission to receive a PhD in divinity, I connected with the Hebrew community, it's so deep. I mean, all the way down to, my studies and, just, from Eastern philosophies, Middle Eastern philosophies, people wonder why I wrap my head. And, Hebrew a lot of times was the introduction to me, coming from a very traditional Christian background and son of a minister, and grandfather was a minister. So I always challenged those very conservative Christian beliefs, because that's what I came from, memorizing Bible verses, all those things. And the thing that spoke to me initially on my journey was Hebrew. And then, here we are today, where it's become the conversation of the world today. I don't think there's anyone who's not aware of, the conflict and ultimately the pain that I caused. And I said it a few times. I've offered up, and I know it's actually Hebrew scripture, to ask for forgiveness once, twice, three times, right. And then they have to forgive you.
That's correct.
So
the Talmud,
the Talmud, you have to forgive me.
Often gets
Rabbi.
A bad rap from certain people, but the Talmud says the way it works.
So it is a must that you forgive me, but in all sincerity, because I actually don't like apologies, because I feel like apologies are empty, because in that sense you can say sorry as many times, but if you don't learn, if you're not corrected, and then you move forward, there's no growth, there's no healing. So that's why, and we'll get into this right now, and forgive me for my long-windedness, but that's why I felt like I'd rather sit down with someone of your stature to really correct me. So I believe more than saying I'm sorry, which I am. I'm sorry for causing pain, hurt to people. But I need to learn how not to do that anymore.
Right.
And that's why I appreciate this discourse. We've already talking, but we're gonna get to it. But my first question for you is, how did we get here?
We got here because the Simon Wiesenthal Center, one of its main focuses, not exclusive, but main, is dealing with anti-Semitism, which unfortunately, even before the pandemic and everything else that's happened since, we were having major violent attacks against New York Jews on the streets of New York and New Jersey, in the last couple of months. So we took the name, or we got the name of a living legend when he was still alive. His name was Simon Wiesenthal, the great Nazi hunter, man who resurrected justice.
That you actually knew personally.
I had the honor to know for almost 3 decades. And, someone who came from a group, the survivors of the Nazi Holocaust, 6 million Jews. He lost 89 members of his family.
Wow.
He was too weak to stand when the American troops in Mauthausen came. He weighed 90 pounds.
Wow.
If I don't like talking about victimhood and victimization, but if there was ever a group of people who had the moral right to say the world is horrible, they knew what was going on, they did nothing, it was the people who stumbled out of those camps. And amazingly, people like Wiesenthal and the others, that generation, bestowed a special gift to all humanity because they re-embraced life.
Right.
But when you take the name of a living legend, and I remember when Rabbi Marvin Heyer, who's the founder and dean and CEO of our place, he went to Vienna.
And that's where he set up shop, right in.
Right, he went right into the heart of the Nazi land.
Wow.
And went to see Mr. Wiesenthal and said, King Solomon, as you know, famous statement says that a good name is more precious than oil.
Mm.
Okay.
Right.
Right. And so I'm here to take your good name.
All right.
He said, well, what do you mean? Why? You want to build a museum. So if you're just going to build a place where people reflect on what happened back in the Holocaust and maybe say the memorial prayer, the Kaddish twice a year, beautiful. I'll give you a letter of endorsement. But if you want my name, I'm an activist. And I expect if I give you my name, you'll be activists. And I know you're going to help me with the Nazi war crimes and all that. That's a given. But I'm not just an activist in that issue. And I want your word that the Wiesenthal Center will always be an activist institution. He said, look, when I grew up in Eastern Europe, he became an architect, married his childhood sweetheart. He said that our first reaction to Hitler in the 1920s were Jewish jokes. Some distant guy with a funny mustache, ranting and raving.
Right.
And he said, by the time we woke up, it was too late. He said, we're not very good at predicting the future. So if you will set up a place that will teach people, he loved young people. The main focus of the center and the museum, everything is trust in the young people. Hate is acquired through learning or through.
It's taught. Hate is taught. It's not innate.
It's taught. So our job is to make sure that we teach it another way. And by the way, of course, we also train police, about 130,000 so far.
Wow.
So it's not just, and I'll tell you exactly how it came about. I remember it like it was yesterday. We showed Schindler's List, right, the famous film, to a whole group from South Central. 2 nights, dinner, etc. And after the showing, one of the folks who was maybe 23 or 24, had already been in jail for murder, and was paroled, got out, was putting his life together. He got up and he said, I think I understand this museum, the Museum of Tolerance. You're trying to teach personal responsibility, critical thinking, and mutual respect. Right. I said, well, you can say one thing, I'll be stealing that line from you for the next 30 or 40 years because you nailed it. But he asked the following question. He said, we get what you're asking from us. What about the people who hold the power? What about the people who pull over? If you're perceived to be in the wrong neighborhood, you're automatically being pulled over, driving white, black, etc. And so the whole idea of actually getting involved in training police didn't come from a business plan. It came from the grassroots, from the community.
From the hearts of the members of the community.
So a core mission of when you hold Mr. Wiesenthal's name is You want to make sure this doesn't happen again. That's
Right.
why I mentioned to you on the phone that just before the pandemic hit, I spent a couple of days in Abuja, Nigeria,
Right.
with a pastor friend,
Right.
Johnny Moore.
Right.
And we've now written a book about the dozens of survivors of terrorism in that country and why, the world's going to have to take note. Otherwise, we've got it. This is all part of the vision of a man called Simon Wiesenthal. So then,
Yeah.
how is it that I sent out? Because I wrote that tweet. It was
I
me.
know you did.
It was me.
It
Okay,
was.
I'm pretty quick. I don't. By the way, I don't have my own Twitter account
Yeah.
or any. But when I saw it, I watched the piece, and when I heard from someone, and with my apologies because I didn't know you, but my daughter in Jerusalem called me this morning,
Right.
and my nephew from New Jersey called me on the way over. The world knows you.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Tell him I
When I-
said what's up.
when, when I watched the piece, and there was somebody there who was saying, "I'm not even a real Jew."
Right.
That goes right to the heart. And I also knew that these themes, Rothschild, all the conspiracies and stuff,
Right.
it's pure Farrakhan. And there were two generations. Griff, who turns out I had something to do with a generation ago,
Yeah, we're
and
gonna
a
get into that as well.
and a younger, better-looking guy, just parroting the old Farrakhan lines. Now, and I understand exactly that for many people in the black community, when they hear Farrakhan, they think of Million Man March. They
Indeed.
think about black empowerment.
Leadership.
They think about leadership. They think about one of the greatest orators in America, which is true.
Very true.
What we think about Farrakhan is a person who has invested a lot of his energies in the hatred of the Jewish people, who's insulted us, said Hitler's a great man, I practice a gutter religion, in some ways really inexplicable. And these are themes that, as I mentioned, he's one of the most honest people in America because he's never changed. These are themes that he brought to Los Angeles in 1984, and which are repeated very often in his Savior Day speeches, across the country. And now with social media platforms reaching more and more of the younger generations.
And speaking of the young generation, as someone who's received, several lessons, whether it's through social media, whether it's my own readings, my own understanding, and that you would maybe perceive as hateful rhetoric or propaganda, was, in my mind, a process of learning. Because, like you said, a lot of people, this new generation, it's the purpose of this platform. We've heard, we're introduced to new information, and if it's not put clearly, which even though I know how you could have taken many of the things that I said as hate and propaganda, but if that was never my heart and intentions. But you touched on a bunch of things that you just recently said, and even speaking of the minister. And it reminded me of one of the great quotes of, like, if the surviving lions don't tell their story, then the hunters will get all the glory. So when you speak of a great man like Mr. Simon Wiesenthal, or in what's perceived in the black community, a great man like Louis Farrakhan, you personally, you said even before we could sit down, as candidly as possible, before we could sit down, that, I must apologize for the hateful things I said. My intentions were, I was talking about how amazing black people were, but it hurt so many people that weren't a part of that community while I was trying to encourage and uplift my own community. And your rebuttal to that, and this was just kind of over, messaging each other, was, let me send you something. And you sent me 9 pages, I believe it was, of some pretty harsh and hateful terminology. I didn't hear anything. I mean, these were words that I was reading, and I was like, I could never condone any of that. It was hateful, demagoguery, all of those type of things. But even in that, I could send you 9 pages. I could send you 90 pages of wonderful things from my perception, from what I was taught. Like you said, that's the only man I know who has ever peacefully brought together 1,000,000 black men at once for atonement. And when we speak of atonement,
Yes.
this is what we're here for. When,
Yes.
if you know the definition of atonement, to right the wrongs of, or for anyone that you may have upset or hurt. That's what atonement is. And I feel like this is an atoning moment. But then I had to go in, because I'm not here to protect anyone else or only have this conversation. I'm not even here to protect my name. I don't care. Cancel me 10 more times. You know what I mean? I don't care about money. I don't care. I'm really care about who I am truly, and knowing that if I hurt someone, I have to correct that. I was taught that. I'm just that certain. First, I must apologize, but tell me how I hurt you, because I can't just say a blanket I'm sorry. But then again, like I said, I self-reflect, and trust me, I had so much reading material, as you see in this. But I just had an opportunity of reading this book, the How to Fight Anti-Semitism, by, I believe, the young woman's name is Barry Weiss.
Yeah, she just resigned from the New York Times this week.
Or Bar. Yeah, as I was reading through it, it's something that stuck out that kind of corrected me, and I felt it in my spirit. And I think it was something where it says, anti-Semitism is fueled through hate, but often. It often, like, I think it was like the good intentions or the misintentions of the good is what perpetuates it.
Right.
And then I was like, wow, that's me. You know what I mean? Because that's probably why they thought I was being, anti-Semite in that sense, because it doesn't matter what my intentions were, it still hurt an entire community.
Part of what's going on here, of course, is a generational difference. Let me explain why. The notion of self-discovery, someone who's serious enough to want to look into many different faiths and religions, and self-awareness, it's important to someone like you. All of those things, including maybe the discussion that you had with Griff.
Mm-hmm.
If you had it in a coffee shop or over dinner, that's
Right.
one thing.
Right.
But as we spoke about the feather story,
Yeah.
you're in a totally different level.
I got to be responsible for all the feathers that I put out there.
Right. You're studying and discovering in real time.
Yes.
And of course, one of the reasons why, and it's tragic that so many people reacted to what was said in that program is, it's all over social media from other folks with other intentions.
And they put it together the way that they want to put it together. I mean, if you could take 90 minutes, people are going to chop this up. People are going to chop what we're talking about right now.
Can we charge them for it?
Yeah, I know, right? We get some kind of publishing or residual. But it's going to be one of those things where you can make it's just like our books of faith, that you can make it say whatever you want it to say.
Right. So when we talk about intention, and I remember also when the announcement came about the Million Man March and that the theme would be repentance, a lot of people in the Jewish community hoped and prayed that would be the beginning of a new chapter with Farrakhan. But it turned out that it absolutely was not. And the part of the deep concerns that we have is because he exudes a kind of image of real leader, courageous, parentheses, doesn't care what the white man says about anything, which is, I can relate to people saying, well, I want to hear more from this guy.
Right.
But on the overall stage of things, someone, who went to Libya when Gaddafi was running that show, got $5 million, from him, just recently was in Tehran, in Iran, with the Ayatollah's people, who are brutal, who throw gays off of apartment house, a 7th story. So.
And that's the thing, I would love to set the table again, because I know we can.
We'll reboot it another way. Just to finish the thought, though, and Farrakhan he sees himself also as a global leader. And more often than not, we see him sort of showing up with folks who really hate America and maybe the idea of America. And that's also a source of concern.
And that's the thing, and that's what I wanted to say about just kind of back up and have a bird's eye view of even what we're discussing. When you say the words hate, and this is just my personal beliefs, and as a spiritual man, I would think you would probably agree. I believe hate is an energy, and it's very contagious, and it's easily digestible, because it's this fire in us that, you know, they often even say emotions are the enemies of facts.
Yes.
And because we can get so riled up, and it's something, even in the moment, somebody says something and they curse and people applaud and all of these things. And it takes me back to even my own relationship with my father, who I said is a minister and has some very, very traditional beliefs when it comes to the Bible, to the idea that the earth might only be 9,000 years old and possibly flat. And even some, you know, because of scripture that they can go to, people's ways of life that they may or may not agree with. And I find myself having discourse with my father daily. And even if we might be screaming and yelling at each other it leaves so angry. But not one day have I never not loved my father unconditionally. And the only reason why I make that example is because when I look to a patriarch in the black community, and we don't have a lot of leaders, I can count them on my hands. If someone tells me that this person is, you can send me whatever thing you say. If you say, nah, I don't agree with that. My dad said that, nah, I'm not rocking. But I'm not in the position as a human being or as a spirit, you know, embodying this human uniform, this flesh suit I got on. I don't have the power to judge or condemn or throw away any human being. And I only can make my assessments off of what I know. And when I think we'll go back, we'll talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, who to me was an amazing man. Malcolm X, these were Muhammad Ali, amazing men. But these are people, this country called Martin Luther King the most dangerous Negro in the nation. They labeled him as a terrorist. And whether he was for nonviolence, Malcolm X at the time was for violence, they were both assassinated. So when someone else tells me, someone that I knew since a child only to be a leader to my community, that I not only can't listen, I can't even talk about him. I can't stand next to him. I can't take a picture with him. Who am I to believe? If somebody told me that, I would be so confused. So in that same sense of someone who I know is about loving, understanding, and healing, my question would be, and I've heard the same thing from him, and I would love to hear what you would say when it comes to atonement, repentance as loving spiritual people. You know, I've been through these cities, like South Central LA, Compton, handing out free food, knocking on doors during the times of COVID, giving toilet paper with the Nation of Islam. Mm-hmm. But I've also, I'm on the board of St. Mary's in New York, a children's hospital, where my personal friend, a rabbi, we go from room to room, children with cancer. I know beautiful, amazing men who have completely different walks of life. And I'm like, why can't I get these two groups together to speak? Why is there so much division where loving spiritual leaders won't talk to each other?
Right. So let me introduce you a little bit to my worldview and how I was born in 1950. That's 5 years after the end of World War II. During the Nazi period, that's 1933 when Hitler came till 45 when he committed suicide.
Right.
So he wasn't really hiding his game plan about Jews, what he thought. He already wrote about it.
Right.
When you come to the Museum of Tolerance, you're going to see something he wrote in 1919 and signed. So he had the hate built in. Just nobody ever thought back then that he would ever have the power to activate his worldview. So my traditions, and which are not too much different than the traditions They certainly have parallels in many similar roots of our parents and grandparents.
It's all Abrahamic. It's all,
right.
We all respect the Torah.
And we hope that Abraham is always forgiving us.
We hope.
For giving him a bad name. But we do hate evil. Evil is real power, and we do hate evil. We don't condone it. There are those whose religious faith or their spiritual approach is, no, you can't hate anything because it's going to
drive out darkness with light.
Yeah, it's going to consume it, right. But there are some times when you're confronted with absolute evil that you have to be lucky enough that Kareem's father's best friend,
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar,
right, burst into a Nazi concentration camp in 1945 and saved some people who a few days later would have been dead anyway from starvation. So the point is, yes, we have to love humanity. Heck, if you see Genesis, our approach is we are each created in the image of God, as you know a little bit of Hebrew. Yeah. Tselem Elohim.
Yeah.
Then there's another line, and we might threaten to give the Talmud a good name here.
Yeah.
The Talmud teaches Kashem she partzofehem shonim shonot kach deoteim shonim.
Okay.
Which means panim is face. Just as no two faces are alike, no two people think exactly alike.
That's true. And I since I don't know, I'm gonna shout myself out, give myself a Hebrew thing. I know Azel Haham Halomed Mikol Adam
excellent.
Means all people.
If you
all the wise man must learn from all people.
That's correct.
So
I believe
while we're
in that.
sitting here, and that's even in that question.
What
that
Mr. Wiesenthal taught me some interesting things. I think only someone who went through it could sort of set those markers down, because he refused to be consumed by hate. His focus was justice, and he invested a lot of time and a lot of trust in the new generation that was coming up in Germany. And there were times I was with him, he'd be in an airport, somebody who is really white, okay? I mean, really, really white, an Aryan, come over with
I was saying they're going to get mad at you for saying that,
piece of paper, and we give the paper to Mr. Wiesenthal, because everybody in Europe knew him then, and he said, this is the name and date of birth of my father or grandfather or older brother. They won't tell me what they did in World War II. Can you please check it out and let me know? That was the kind of symbol that Mr. Wiesenthal became to a lot of young people, young Germans.
Right.
So his humanity was limitless. But as someone who had experienced the ultimate evil, he wrote a book. You got to read it, called The Sunflower.
Sunflower.
Okay, there are a couple of different editions. The newer one has. You could probably teach the course eventually on the sunflower, because it's about everything we talked about yesterday.
Right.
It's a real story. Mr. Wiesenthal was in 6 camps during the war. I think this was in the 4th one. And one day he was called out of line. We call the appel. You're lined up. You can stand there for hours. The Nazis did it just, to torture people.
Right.
And they took him, and they brought him into a field full of sunflowers. There was a field hospital, big tent. He goes into a tent, and there is someone who's dying of their injuries. Turns out it's an SS officer. And he said, I want to see a Jew, I want to confess, and I want to be, I want someone who's Jewish to accept my apologies for what I did before I go to the next world. I want to clear the... And he told they brought in Simon. He was shocked. He figured, he didn't know, maybe they'd take him in the tent to shoot him or whatever.
Right.
And he was asked, will you forgive him?
Wow.
And the book stops there, and then he asks religious, spiritual leaders like the Dalai Lama and others, what would you say? What would you say to someone who asks you that question?
What would you say?
You're asking me? I was born in Brooklyn. So I think what I would say is the following. Whatever it is that you did to me, I have the obligation at least to think especially if it's a capital crime. Not, I have if it's in me to quote unquote forgive you, maybe. But for what you did to 6 million people, I don't have the power.
It's pure evil.
I don't have the power to forgive you for what happened to someone else. I'm not. Whether it's a rabbi, it can be a real rabbi, who looks the role. It can be a great scholar. At the end of the day, I think Judaism's approach on this issue is, in terms of what happens to you, you're in the situation to deal with that directly. But what's done to others, you don't have the moral right to forgive what happened to someone else.
Right.
I
can hear that. And
so,
I think that would kind of,
and
Simon's
response.
What I was saying, I don't have the power to judge either.
Right. So but that's different.
Right.
If you have absolute evil, there's an obligation to judge, not the power to. There's an obligation to judge. Why? Because people can misconstrue that if I don't have the power to judge, then you sort of like deflect those difficult decisions, because we all agree that when you're confronted with evil in the world, I mean, every kind of evil act, it destroys the Tselem Elohim. Right. It destroys the concept that each person. We've come to understand
God in all of us.
And I think God must have a great sense of humor as well, and I hope a very slow fuse. But our theological approach, or the way I was taught, was that every person born to this planet has free choice, free will, to act how they decide to act. They're going to be influenced by the kind of parents, the neighbors, their gang, etc.
Yeah.
But at the core, everybody has the right and the freedom to choose how to act.
Right. Okay?
And everyone has an obligation then to take responsibility for their actions.
I agree, and this is where I agree with you. And because you said a lot just now, and I would love to unpack it. But one thing that stood out is it said, "We hate evil," and I can agree with that. I can, even whether it's Christian beliefs or Sikhism, or we're like, oh, we were gonna just shower everything with love or drown out darkness with light.
Right.
But when something is absolutely evil, demonic, the darkest of the dark forces, the only way to defeat it is with the strength of love from each other. But it has to be with it has to be with a warrior spirit.
So let me pick up on that if I can, because you're right. So I do a lot of traveling in the Arab and Muslim world, which is really interesting. That could be another private conversation.
We'll do that in the next session that we have.
But what's interesting, especially in the Gulf, but I've been to Indonesia, even Sudan. In fact, I'm going to be going back to Sudan if they ever let me fly again.
They will.
What's interesting
Who's
is they is my boss, my wife. That's simple enough.
That's very simple.
I use the royal. I use the royal they.
Right.
So the interesting thing is, because this, I don't think we'd be going in this direction, but it's an interesting question and an interesting point. People respect strength, not necessarily always military strength. It could be moral, it could be economic. People respond to strength.
They do.
Now, in the changes that are going on in the Arab world because of Iran and other things, and the Arab Spring and social media, a lot of things roiling. I don't think it's because of my good looks that I have opportunities to spend time with people.
It might be.
I can't believe it. Sitting, I'm at one of those Shia meetings where, and I'm sitting next to the main guy, and I'm wearing my kippah in a place like Bahrain. Quite interesting. Right. So the point being is that if you're strong, I'm not saying it personally, their perception is, oh, well, he's a Zionist, which means probably the Israelis sent him anyway. And he knows people in Washington, so he's a really connected Jew. He's got a lot of power.
Those are stereotypes.
Right.
Yes.
So, but I sometimes will leverage that in places like that because I don't have an end game. My end game is let's make sure that the kids have a curriculum that teaches mutual respect, etc.
Education.
I'm not a businessman, so I'm not looking for a couple of oil contracts.
Right.
I'm an anomaly. I'm coming to these meetings. I'm asking essentially for nothing except I'll sit down with anybody who's ready to respect me. But here's the point. If we want to promote and teach tolerance and mutual respect, what's really interesting is that if you enter from a position of strength, not of arrogance, of strength, there's a lot of interesting things that will happen. If you walk into the lion's dens, and there are many you mentioned before about a lion,
Yeah.
you walk into that lion's den, and the perception is you're weak, you have zero opportunity to impact.
That's why I say you want the lion's share of the meal. I understand. I definitely agree with you, but it just goes to a place, honestly, and only wanted to highlight that aspect because, like you said, with strength, with it's that psychological concept with love and fear. Fear comes reverence, and in that reverence, that's how you gain respect for your community, and then that's even where we got into a lot of that conversation with Griff and I was actually having about the idea of ownership and utilizing your strength and utilizing your position to get as much as you wish for, and that to me is a supremacy quality, or I don't quality, supremacy method, and that to me, when I heard you say we hate evil, and this was never supposed to be a conversation about comparing oppression, because we know as we sit across from each other, we both come from communities that have been oppressed and just slaughtered. And if there's a commonality that we could say, there's no need to that's given.
And there are plenty of places we can walk into the United States where people will smile at you,
right?
But may not exactly think, oh, wow.
They're not even thinking about that.
We get two for the price of one.
Our commonality, right, indeed. Our commonality is that we are people of oppression. So that's why instead of, I don't know where the energy came from to divide us, but we should be allies because of our common oppression. So to say all of that, when you said I hate evil, I feel you. I hate evil too, because I feel like, and I will take the word evil and say another term, in which the term I feel like the only thing I was discussing with Griff is white supremacy. I hate white supremacy. I will never apologize for saying I hate white supremacy. If there's probably one thing where I say, I love everybody, man, I hate white supremacy. And if there's somebody who wants to cancel me for that, so be it. I don't need your money. I don't care. And even if, for whatever reason, because I don't want to take anybody, I'll take out the word white if you would like.
So it's
blue
fine.
Supremacy.
Let me ask you.
Polka dot supremacy.
What did M.L. King say about that?
He said, when evil men plot, good men plan.
Right. Right. Means you have to confront the evil, not deflect it. And M.L. King, in my humble opinion,
they killed.
Yes, but in my
white supremacy.
In my humble opinion, M.L. King looked at what looked like an even bleaker situation back then. Okay, he hated the evil.
Yes,
and I think the way what inspired me about him, and still does to this day, is he figured out something really important about America, at least its potential, which is if you can figure out a way to awaken the conscience of people to help defeat racism, not by saying it doesn't exist or making believe we don't look differently, but if you can come up with coalition, you might actually win the day. And that's not a message a lot of people are hearing today. We talked about this in our phone conversation. Yeah. The Farrakhan's, if you will, of the world, it's all a matter, the lens is race. For Martin Luther King, the lens was different, meaning, to again make it clear, I don't need to teach you about the reality of racism. You can be the most, and maybe you will someday be the most spectacularly successful black man in America,
I receive it.
Okay, you'll get it, but that doesn't mean you'll be hated any less. Maybe you'll be hated
No, they
more.
still they
because
everybody's mad at me right now.
Because racism is a part
It's
of
real.
It is real.
It's institutionalized.
That's also could be a long discussion. My point on the human level is the following: what did ML King? What was his exit strategy? What's his vision? What was the man's vision for America? Today it sounds like revolutionary, and since he paid with his life, we can say that he wasn't very Pollyannish. He understood better than we understood in real time what he was up against, FBI and all the rest of it.
I seen the promised land. I may not get there with you.
Right, but he said also, I'm hoping, I'm working, I'm praying for the day that there'll be a time in America when you will be judged based on the quality of your character and not the color of your skin.
I'm waiting for that day still.
No, that's not a good answer.
And
you got to work for that day.
But he also said that was his dream. But a few years later, he said his dream turned into a nightmare because he realized that it was more about capitalism than the color. It was more about the poor and the hierarchy. And I feel like that's where we get into those conversations about, well, why is it that this infrastructure of white supremacy, this institutionalized racism where black people are perceived as property and second-class citizens and just have to daily prove to this day. We can go to all of the museums and see all of our oppression, but currently I can go outside and watch black men be oppressed. We can currently, whether we're seeking the justice of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. I stood in the spot where George Floyd was murdered, and my spirit shook just based off of this is still happening. We need positive energy. We need love. We need healing immediately. So you're my brother. So this conversation, I'm like, yo, okay, I will apologize. I'm sorry, because that's not the messaging. Even when I'm speaking to someone like a Griffin, we all have radical friends and things, and we know this is what this forum is for, to have difficult conversations. And some people are going to say some things, and even if I'm nodding, because I read the books they read. I know the things, even as we're talking back and forth and, joking in Hebrew, because there's a commonality and an appreciation and a respect. But when you get to a place of where, like you said, I may not understand everything you know, and you may not understand everything I know, but as a student, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to listen, because I feel like that's how we grow together as a community.
Right.
So
just what's interesting, I'm listening very carefully to what you're saying, and maybe. And I'm not going to compare you to ML King. Nobody compares to him.
Please
but
don't.
You're of another generation, and with all due respect, I think you're an interesting role model to show people how you could use capitalism. Capitalism has been very good
to me,
to you, right?
Yes.
So,
yes, it has.
So maybe, and of course, thank God there are so many. And increasing, successful African American business people built empires,
and we coming together. We learning from your community.
Right.
I was like, teach me your ways, Rabbi.
That's and I'm always open to learn. But when I look at Simon and I look at the survivors who are now leaving the world stage, every day we're losing them. They taught me two things. First of all, they taught me to hate evil.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, they taught me to embrace humanity and hope. Because if they were able to bring kids into the world after what they saw,
right?
And
you make a great
that's
point.
like so empowering. But again, if you go back, it's very frustrating for American Jewry. Why? Because when they look back at Selma, forget about the movie where they took the rabbi out.
Right.
But that day in Selma,
right,
there was
there was a rabbi. There was many people from the Jewish community doing the civil rights. I've always stated that.
But that rabbi experienced Hitler and escaped Germany in time,
and then came over and fought with us.
Came over, so he didn't need an engraved invitation.
100% right.
He saw the injustice, And he showed up.
And that's why we are brothers and members of the community. And the one point I was making when I was talking about this definitely isn't a comparison of oppression, but the same way that George Floyd, we can go outside. Let's not forget, and I'm aware, and I love this book because it details from a perspective from a young Jewish woman that not a few years ago, the energy of white supremacy entered a Pennsylvania synagogue and killed 11 people. Last year, a 19-year-old white supremacist spirit
Yes.
in San Diego, moments from here, went in and shot up a synagogue and killed members of the
Yeah, he killed his sister, one of our members of our synagogue in L.A. So it hurts very.
So
and you have
there's
also
pain amongst us.
You have New Zealand,
right?
The mosques that were the murders that were broadcast on social media in real time.
And so I understand when you hear things that sound like rhetoric that are reminiscent of the Holocaust or reminiscent of stereotypes that make people want to ostracize your faith. I understand why that's painful. I understand why that's hurtful, and that is never my intentions. But my intentions are to speak truth and truth to power. Because if this is a conversation of truth and reconciliation, we can't get caught up in who was oppressed the most. We can't get caught up in you can't say that or you can't do this or well the blacks have this. Well that's not this conversation. If this is a conversation of true healing and understanding, we got to say we're together. And even that conversation of being one, because ultimately that's just what I was trying to get to that idea of, because I gave my friend Griff the opportunity because for 30 years, he believes that he has been blackballed from entertainment. And my first question was, why? What happened? What did you say that not even 30 years can get you back to where you need to get to? That got you kicked out by your friends. People don't know that, a lot of people don't know that Chuck D and Professor, these were community activists. They weren't rappers. These were people that worked with children and was trying those same concepts that you speak of in the 80s and the 90s, were trying to build their community, empower their community. And whether it's rhetoric, whether it's hate speech that's perceived, they hear that there's a supreme power over them that's keeping them in these low, disenfranchised states. So I must speak my truth to that power in order for me to build up. And you brought up some great things. There would be no word ghetto. We know the word ghetto because that is a Jewish word. So we know, and you know about disenfranchisement, but from that same time as the originators of the ghetto, we also have to understand, for us, when we hear things like redlining and things like that, when it comes to capitalism, these are things where it's like, oh, I'm never going to be able to get out of the position that I am. So then all I can do is speak the truth that I know, the books that I've read. Is like, I got to speak my truth to power. And even as a person who has individually succeeded with capitalism, none of us is great as all of us. I'm not successful until we all are successful. So everything that I know, everything I learned, the purpose of this forum is to spread to my people. Now, if I'm spreading hate, let's get that out of here, because that's a distraction. I don't want to hate anyone, but I want to uplift, build, and say, I read this, and that's how I did. I learned from Rabbi Cooper that if I do this, this, and this in my community, I can enrich my community. So therefore, we're going to pass that on. This will be around forever. So now I'm feeding my people, and I'm feeding my people love, not hate.
So let me make a couple of other points about victimization. I think that's the other lesson that I learned from a man like Simon Wiesenthal, because it would have been so easy for him. He was a victim, in a sense, an ultimate victim.
Indeed.
He never defaulted to that position. That took an amazing amount of humanity.
Say it.
That's also, when you read the literature, about newly freed slaves, or the effort to, in the 20th century, including right in our hometown of New York, the efforts to raise yourself up without allowing the negative to envelop you completely. That's not so simple.
Right.
And what you have what I don't know how many times I'm interviewed by the media. So tell us about the statistics of hate
We don't
crimes.
like the media either.
You know, tell us about the statistics on hate crimes.
Right.
I said, well, it's really very easy. Ever since 1991 or 92, when the FBI has been keeping official statistics, with the exception of the 3 months after 9/11, the number one target of race-based hate crimes in America, African Americans.
About to say.
And the number one target of religion-based hate crimes in America are the Jews.
Absolutely.
Now, if you would ask me, is that a 1-2 position that we want to maintain? We're very happy to offload that to someone else. But the fact that it's still there, and the fact when you see it transmuted onto social media, you see the things in the real life and then feeding, back and forth. I learned from someone like Simon Wiesenthal and all the other survivors that I've had the honor of meeting and interacting with, is that if you can avoid the victimization route, your chances of success in the real world are really enhanced. If you default to the victimization, chances are you're not going to be able to crawl out of that hole. Not that it was a fair place to start from
the beginning.
From the beginning, but when I think back of Mr. Wiesenthal, and of course he never left the Holocaust. Man, think about it.
He
the
went
guy
to
was
Vienna
he's an architect.
Yeah.
do the math. He's an architect. He's in a DP, displaced persons camp,
right.
a few months after the war with his friends on a Friday night, and with the Shabbat candles. And they're all talking and said, well, I'm going to be a jeweler in Antwerp. And
right.
I'm going to go into, well, if I can, I have a cousin in Chicago, maybe I can get into real estate. And then people turn around and they say, Wiesenthal, you're an architect. Did you notice that the entire continent of Europe is destroyed?
Right.
You could become a very rich man. He built a couple of buildings before the war. And he said, everybody around here is a believer. So I know for sure you'll be a jeweler, you're all going to be successful, but there'll become a time, as we say, where after 120 years, because Moses lived to be 120, so you always say to somebody, after 120 years, which means when you die,
right.
when we all die and go up to the heavenly court, I'll be the rich man and you'll be the poor ones. Because he said, I'm the only one who didn't forget them. So he found purpose in his life by staying true and being a kind of unofficial ambassador for victims. That's a tremendous
and you're speaking
thing that he took.
Of course, you're speaking of concepts and ideologies that is innate in your lineage and in the things that you pass on from one child to another. And that's been robbed from us. We're told that we're less than from day one. So I don't have, you'll be a jeweler, you'll be this. It's told to me there's a school to prison pipeline. It's told to me based off the test scores that I get in the third grade, how long I'm gonna spend in prison. So I don't have those amazing stories like you have to necessarily just pass around.
I'm gonna change. In fact, I'll leave names out, but I'm gonna tell you a story that happened to me. That brought home your point and sort of refocused a little bit how I viewed my job and my life. So we have a traveling exhibition on the Holocaust called Courage to Remember. It's been in many languages, been 30 years. We put it on the road all over the world, every continent. A few years ago, we had the honor of bringing the exhibition right next to the tomb of Martin Luther King Jr. in Atlanta.
Wow.
It was, for me, there were no words. So when I came there was a very dapper, the Atlanta folks are.
They could dress.
Oh man,
they get it going.
This guy was quite amazing.
Full of swag.
And he said, Rabbi Cooper, I'm state senator so and so, and I said, well, great to meet you. Thanks for coming, but about 30 minutes early.
Right.
He said, no, I came early because I wanted to share something with you. I've been thinking on this a long, long time, and I wanted to share it with the appropriate person. Said, I was born in Harlem, probably around the same time as you. We were born in Brooklyn, you said.
Right, right.
So there were 7 kids in the family. I was the middle child. And I think there were 6 separate fathers. My mom was a single mom. And she must have been one heck of a mom because
Had to be. Shouts out to the Black Queen.
He landed up in Columbia. He went to law school against all odds, big success. Came down to Georgia, got into politics, dressed to the nines, successful. And he said, but I want to tell you something. A couple of years ago, I started doing research about my lineage because it was about where did I come from. And he said, and I have, as you can imagine, I've got plenty of good contacts. And after exhaustive research, I was able to trace myself back to a plantation in Virginia in 1851. Mm-hmm. Before that, I have no idea.
Nothing.
And when he took, and we're standing next to the tomb, next to the story of the Holocaust, you don't have to get into a bidding war about who suffered more. The thing that Wiesenthal's generation, the survivors, did, primarily for the Jews, but not only, is we were lucky that some survived because they were the bridge to our past.
Right.
Without that, we'd be looking down the same black hole.
Indeed.
And that vortex. So let's just say I'm much more attuned, I'm sensitive to that fact.
Yeah, and
that's an open wound. I get it. As someone who's got
and
pretty strong Jewish DNA, I get it.
And they keep telling us that, get over it. You don't have to, why are you guys always bringing up slavery? And in these conversations, these strong conversations amongst the diaspora that, and whether it's myself and Griff, we speak in a way because we know that even during those times, as far as we can take it back, white supremacy has built themselves up on our backs. So at this time, as we were gaining knowledge of self, as we are understanding these great principles that you're speaking of, that you have a connection to, that's where like, oh, okay, now we're finding the gold. Now we're reading the Torah. And in that sense, and that's when we had that conversation about anti-Semitism, which was a title, which Griff said this in the interview, like they threw it on us to divide us. And I was like, he's 100% right. And that's what's happening right now. They're trying to divide us with this term. And then so therefore, in a very charismatic, and maybe we could have did it, like we did it in a very pastoral way where it was like anti-Semi, you break down Semitism, which is Sem means Shem, and right. Shem and Ham were Noah's lineage. Like we know these things when I've studied these things. So all to say, there's a commonality. I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, and that's what we tap into, because I felt like so many people got hurt when I said that, the true Hebrews, and it wasn't, I mean, maybe I shouldn't have used the true, and then like, just like, if there's Hebrew blood that I believe is flowing through my body and Hebrew blood that's flowing through your body, that doesn't separate us, that doesn't cancel you out, that makes us brothers. That's why I sit here and say my brother or my sister, because I'm finding commonality, not get out of here, you guys aren't.
I'm with you, except for there's one thing we have to confront and we have to state, and that is the following. Unless Louis Farrakhan is an agent of white supremacy, he's made a choice for reasons I never understood.
I definitely don't believe that.
Okay, I don't believe that either. So it means that he's made the choice to set up statements that are designed to divide us, that are designed to keep us apart. You can't you can say maybe Hebrew, okay, when you say Judaism's a gutter religion, when you say Hitler was a great man.
We all know the power of words. We do. And that's why we're sitting there today.
And he's a much more powerful communicator than the two of us put together. That's the truth.
He's an amazing orator, like you said. But in that sense to where, and if it, again, hateful rhetoric, propaganda, whether we're talking about Zionism or banking or anything, we've sat here, even in this time we sat here and made reference to stereotypes And we've laughed about it. We joked about it. But you know why? Because there's a commonality. There's no malice. There's no hate.
Right.
We can say, oh, you know, you Jewish people would do this. You know, you black people know how to dress or whatever. And it's love. There's nothing. There's no hate there. So, and again, maybe it's about representation. Maybe when I'm talking to Professor Griff, you know, Rabbi Cooper should be on the other side of the table because, and well, I'm glad I get to bring this up in this moment because that conversation between Professor Griff and I probably would have never happened if it wasn't for you. And I say that because if we go all the way back to 1989,
I spent most of my life, taking the heat.
You are the rabbi that caused Public Enemy to break up.
Right. And as I mentioned to you, I actually never heard of Professor Griff because he wasn't listed as talent. Yeah, but you can also argue that I'm the person who
broke up Public Enemy.
No, who put Public Enemy on the front page of the papers and on the Today Show and all the rest.
Shouts out to Chuck D. Flavor Flav. Have you ever met anyone from Public Enemy?
Well, let's see.
Well, you did. You got a chance to meet Chuck D because of you took him to the Museum of Tolerance.
Chuck D. We were also on the Today Show together. Many.
When's the last time you spoke to Chuck?
Probably 25 years ago.
Wow. We got to get y'all reunited.
What's he doing these days?
Speaking, leading, teaching. You know, he's a rabbi to the hip hop community. Everybody knows rabbi means, teacher, leader.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, he has taught me. You know, I've sat on panels with him. I study his music, and he just performed at the BET Awards. I'll send you the tape. But but in that sense, we joke but you. At the time, and if you could just, let's unpack it a little bit. Tell me, when you first heard of Public Enemy, what was it that said, I believe this rap group of young black men are anti-Semitic?
It was the lyrics. I mean, I'm not a music critic.
Yeah, and I still don't know what they said, and even in that conversation with Griff, because again, I was a kid, I grew up but I didn't know, and again, we don't want to perpetuate what they said, but you felt whatever they said was hateful to your community.
So here's the point that I tried to make back then in the earliest days of rap, in which my Jewish friend said, "What's rap?" And we played the song 3 times. What are you talking about?
What did he say?
What did he say? Okay. Yeah. Right? And that was before, rap changed the world. Now it's a universal language. I travel the world. You get off the plane in Tokyo, in Jerusalem, everywhere.
Hip-hop has taken over the world. Hip-hop has changed the world.
It has. But back in its birthing process,
right.
Again, for the same reason, our job is to look at what's going on, what the trends are, who's saying what. When that came out, and if I was smart enough, I would have invested maybe in Sony Music. Although I want you to know, Sony Music in the United States only had to deal with me once. In Japan, we took down Sony Music twice.
Wow.
On stuff that they were doing.
You came back. Did you come back Guns N' Roses too, or somebody?
Well, Guns N' Roses. It was doing some.
You was knocking everybody down.
Edgy stuff, but that's my point.
Right.
In other words, for me, it wasn't about that. What zip code or what color skin a person.
If you heard hate, you wanted to.
Right, and especially since I do. I was
in your opinion.
I was an alto when I was growing up in the choir that I was in. And I never graduated from there, but I know
Rabbi's
something
Got
about
Talent. That's my new show.
I have a love of music, and I know that music is
the most powerful force on this planet.
Right. So it's real simple. You do the math. You have the most powerful force,
and
then you have, cultural stuff that's doing, and then you have the music scene in the United States, which I'm sure you'll do 20 different shows on. But back then, it was quite dynamic, and when it crossed the line in terms of lyrics, the message was that doesn't compute. It's also a signal to the companies, not just the talent, that you shouldn't be marketing stuff that includes a message of hate. Right. And if it isn't hate, you better do a better job of explaining it.
Now, okay, to your point, even if it's something hateful, I agree with you 100%. If there's content that is hateful, purposefully hateful, we should do away with that. But then you get into, and this is what I believe. You have the right to say whatever you want.
That is correct.
But you also have to deal with the consequences of what you say. And that's why I'm so outspoken, because I would stand and fall on my sword. If it came out of my mouth, I'm responsible for it. But in saying all of that, and this is why I asked your help, Rabbi, because I feel like I'm currently in a position right now, sitting here across from me as we speak. And a lot of it is because I'm sitting with you. Everybody is throwing hate at me right now. I made a lot of people mad. I made your community mad. I made my community mad by apologizing.
I told you what was going to happen.
You did.
I'm not smarter than you. I'm just older.
Call you like, you know they ain't going to be rocking with you, right? And you're right, because, and I'm trying to have a bigger thinking. You said, if you sit down with me, well, first you said, I have to apologize. I have no problem apologizing to anybody. I'm man enough. If I hurt you, I'm sorry. I'll say that to anyone I hurt. Whether it's if I'm driving in my car and I'm not paying attention to something and I hit someone with my car, I'm not going to jump up like, that wasn't my intentions to run your ass over. I first have to say, I'm sorry. And then I have to correct the situation. So if I hit you with my car, I'm sorry. But now I'm in a position where, like, cancel me. I don't care. I've left NBC. I've left several companies. I don't need their money. I don't care about that. But now I'm in a position where I have some great partners and some great friends, colleagues, who stood beside me and said, Nick, we got to change some things. You got to say this differently. Can never talk about this. Don't say this. This is offensive to just like the N-word is offensive to you guys. When we hear this, it's the same. Had some great conversations. But then I've had some conversations where higher-ups have told me that I was going to be made an example of. And it wasn't even about me and someone that said something about another community. We have to make an example out of him because this has to stop. And I'm like, okay, I'll make an example out of me. Let's make a good example out of me. Don't perpetuate these stereotypical ideas that Jewish people run everything or Jewish people have the power to cancel you. And then if you say you don't want stereotypes, but then you cancel me? I don't really know where to begin if we're really trying to get reconciliation. And I've called people. I will talk to. I'll tell you I'm sorry. I'll tell you I'm sorry in front of in the camera. Whatever you want, because I know there's no malice or hate in my heart, and I believe there's no malice and hate in your heart. And we're successful, living, breathing people in one of the toughest years we've ever experienced. Let's show unity to where I can say sorry to you to your face, and I'm met with silence. Or I'm met with aggression. No, we don't accept your apology. That's not sorry enough. That's a non-apology. I'm like, I'm asking to be corrected from your community. Give me books. Teach me. I'm an empty vessel, an empty, broken vessel. Teach me, fix me, lead me. And that's why I can say I love you for this opportunity, because I know you catching it as well. But to have this conversation, in a non-judgmental form, in a non-judgmental way. And even though you did say if someone wants a PhD in Jewish hatred that kicked all this off, then...
well, you are a very effective communicator.
Yes, thank you. And I believe I'll be that sacrifice. I have no problem being that sacrifice. If this whole ordeal brings people closer together like you and I are now, and can talk about any subject matter and get clarity, job well done. You talk about a purpose life. You talk about the great Mr. Wiesenthal. I admire him. I admire someone who can go straight into the trenches, build his office in Vienna, Nazi Central, white supremacy Central.
Yes.
And say, I'm at y'all. That's how we would say, I'm getting at you. We here. I pulled up. What's happening? Like that's how I view that.
That's exactly.
That's what he did.
You know,
that's a real rider right there.
The first time I visited Mr. Wiesenthal in Vienna, back in 1978. Okay, the first time I was in that country.
Right.
And they weren't so used to seeing some younger guys walking around, with their. They knew what it was. They
knew what
didn't
a
like
yarmulke
it.
was.
So he said, "Be in the lobby of the Intercontinental at 10 a.m. I'll pick you up and drive you." Of course, I didn't know what kind of driver he was before.
Right.
Okay, that's another story.
It's a whole other story.
So and it's a
Wasn't
big.
the best driver, ladies.
It's the classic European kind of hotel. It's a massive kind of hall. And I'm waiting there, and about 3 minutes after 10, he's a hulking guy, comes. I see he's coming in from the opposite door. It's about a half a block away, maybe less. And he's walking, and then he sees me, and he starts yelling, Abe, Ab.
Hey.
Yeah. So I ran over to him. I said, "Simon, are you okay? Is everything all right?" He said, "Yeah, of course. What's the problem?" I said, "Well, you were screaming at the top of your lungs my name." He says, "No, you don't understand. I want he should see I came in," and he points to about 5 people on the staff who are over 60. I want he should know I'm here. I want he should know I'm here.
Right.
So, and yet he was really, in a sense, the ultimate humanitarian. Groups, the Tutsi Indians from the Americas came to see him. The Gypsies, unbelievable victims of the Nazis, including forgotten. He wouldn't forget them.
Right.
So he stood up. He became, in his lifetime, a real symbol. And it was hard enough trying to live up to a living legend. and in a way, it really informs us going beyond.
Well, you're carrying on his legacy in a wonderful way.
And the bottom line is, when you haven't been yet, but you will soon, you come to Museum of Tolerance,
next week.
We don't try to be too judgmental, because I think maybe rabbis, after they graduate from being like pulpit rabbis or pastors, you don't want to lecture people.
At all.
You don't. You want them to come to understand
feel comfortable.
It. But we have one spot in the museum which is an absolute, I would say, if you want to know what we really believe in. So when you come in, you're introduced by this guy coming out on the screen. And in the end, he says, "Okay, now choose which door you want to enter the museum." One door,
I know where you're going.
Green door is without prejudice, and the red door is with prejudice.
Right.
And I remember that when the advance team from the Dalai Lama came to the museum, they were really, one guy was like really bent out of shape. Why? Because if you pull the green door, it's locked. And the sign comes up and says, "Think, now use the other door."
Right.
So life is all about, don't deny that.
Right.
Yeah, we all have prejudices.
We all have prejudices. I always say that.
That's a given. The question is how you're going to handle it. Now,
a lot of people have prejudged, then that's what's brought us here to this table.
With the Dalai Lama's guy, I finally said to him, "Look, what are you worried about? If he really is a god, the door's going to open."
Right.
And when the Dalai Lama, who's one of the greatest people I ever met, came, he made a beeline for the red door.
Right. He just knew. He's I've seen this trick before.
No. It's who he was.
He's honest.
People who get it, get it. We're not out to create.
But that's the thing. Everybody's pretending that they're perfect. And that's why I come from a place. I know I'm flawed. I know I can say things that may be looked at as like, "Yo, Nick wilding for that." But I embrace who I am and try to live my truth. So and in that sense of everything that you saw in my conversation with Grizz and all the things, like I said, you can go to the internet, you're going to hear some poems from me, some songs, some all type of things where he was like, "Ooh, that's a little harsh," but I have accepted that, I prejudge. Yes, like that. Prejudice means to prejudge, and I prejudge every situation before I step into it. But I don't prejudge anything with hate, because I don't feel like there's an ounce of hate in my heart. So, but I'm not afraid to talk about anything. I'm not afraid to. I want to talk about centralized banking and the Federal Reserve and I want Jekyll Island.
I want to talk about banking too, because I'd like to get a piece of the action. If we own all the banks, what happened?
Yeah, why you didn't get your share? But no, and again, because when I speak of those things, and that's what to me got mixed up in that, and even when the savagery and lesson, I was speaking from books that I've read and know about white supremacy. I wasn't speaking at one point. I was not speaking. Now I hate white supremacy, and I will say this: you don't have to be white to practice the energy of white supremacy. There's black people who practice white supremacy, who are religiously living that to this day. So even in that sense of, because what I learned from in the recent times, even when I said, this is a statement I definitely would take back. I said, I can't be anti-Semitic because I'm from the Semitic people. I was 100% wrong by saying that. One of the reasons, because whether you believe my DNA and whether we can go ancestry.com or wherever we go and see who, if I do have, Hebrew blood flowing through my body, just because I'm a Hebrew doesn't mean I can't perpetuate hate propaganda. Because I know black people who are definitely black who project hate towards the black community. So in saying that, I would love to retract that statement, but the only thing in which I was saying I was trying to say, how can you be ostracized from something that is your own? And that it clearly got lost in translation. But I say all of that to say, if our goals are the same goals, why aren't we allies? I've sat here and I've watched you every time we get into these conversations, and you bring up the Honorable Minister Farrakhan as if like that's where the hate began and that's where it all goes back to. And that's one individual, powerful individual, great orator, all of those things. But you and I are not him.
Correct.
And I don't want to reference him in speaking. Now, I would love to see you two sit down. That'd be amazing. I'll get my popcorn. Well, and that's one of the questions of like, why hasn't that happened? I know there's been invitations, but that's beyond me, because that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to discuss. And even the question I asked is like, in the current position that I'm in, where everybody mad at Nick, how do we get past it? How do we fix it? I've said I'm sorry. I know the Hebrew law. I know you. Is it how many more times do I have to ask for forgiveness before people say, "Oh, he's disingenuous," or "Oh, he apologized to the Jews, but he didn't apologize to the whites." I don't see. I hate. The only thing I hate is white supremacy, and I will never apologize for that. Yeah. And because last time I checked, white people are more like I have a joke in one of my stand-ups, like an eggshell alabaster. We should start describing people like they describe paint at Home Depot. Maybe because the color of my skin is not black. The color of your skin is not white. But the idea of white supremacy, I said it's an acronym. When having inheritance to everything. Like, when you believe you own everything, I have a problem with that. And you've told the world that you reign over others, I have the biggest issue with that. And I will hate that until the day I die, and I will die for that. Because that's how much I love my people, and I love my community, and I love you. I don't think... Everything that I know, it pains me, and I know we probably gonna hug and shed tears, and I'm gonna tell you all the things I understand when I go to the Museum of Tolerance, because I've seen the movies, I've read the books. This current book made me emotional to know that there's so much hate for a community. But you know what that common hate for the black community comes from and the Jewish community comes from? White supremacy. The idea of eugenics that was placed on us and still placed on us today in America, and that Hitler adopted.
That's correct. Came from America.
From America, to which caused the Holocaust, is white supremacy.
And now being used by the Communist Party in China against Muslims. That's
hate. That's evil. That's what you and I hate. So how can I get our community? How can I stop the hate coming towards me, and let's project it, direct it in the right direction, and get over this.
Right. So I think you and I are not interested in an apology tour
at all.
Okay. You're too good looking, and I'm too old.
Right.
So
I'm sincerely sorry. I need you. This is a high level emergency. I need you. I'm very sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's just a 10-minute break if you guys don't mind.
If you got 10 minutes?
Sure.
I'm very sorry, Rabbi.